Iran extends voting for a new parliament, though turnout is projected to be low. The election expected to result in a boost for conservatives after thousands of moderate candidates were disqualified. Germany boosting security against the threat of far-right extremists. Meanwhile, investigators look into whether the gunman who attacked immigrants in Hanau had assistance. And fighting over 1 trillion euros and how to spend it. European leaders try to put together a 7-year EU budget, revealing resentments between wealthy and poorer members. Hello and welcome to our viewers here in France and around the world. I'm Charlie James. Iranians have been given 2 additional hours to choose a new parliament Friday. State TV says the government is keeping polls open to accommodate a rush of voters, though there has been concern many people will stay home, either in protest or due to disinterest. This is an election seen as likely to help hardline loyalists of the supreme leader tighten their grip on power. France 24 reporter James Andre is in Tehran speaking to citizens and sent us this update on the vote.
Well, I am in this polling station in eastern Tehran. The polling station is set in a mosque. Many polling stations in the city and across the country are set inside mosques. Now, there are steps to voting. The first step is control of the identity of the voter. As you can see, there is a machine here where the identity piece, which is presented, usually a passport, is controlled, and that is proof that indeed the voter is enlisted to cast his ballot. Second step, the voter is given the actual ballot itself, and then he crosses this room here in order to fill in his ballot. As you can see here, you have all the candidates which are listed. Every candidate has a number. The voters will write 33 numbers. 30 numbers for the members of parliament, the ones elected at the Iranian parliament, and 3 names for the experts council. Once they filled this ballot box, this ballot in, they take their ballot and they cast their ballot in these boxes here. You can see the boxes, and this is where voters cast their ballot. Once they have cast their ballot, they take their ID, which is here, they recuperate it, and they have voted in this election. Now, people were queuing here in this conservative part of Tehran since 8 o'clock in the morning, and for them, for most of these voters, it was a religious duty to be here. This is what they had to tell us.
It's our national duty to vote. Our supreme leader has instructed us to do so that we can take the destiny of our country into our own hands.
Look, I've taken part in all the elections since the Islamic Revolution. I haven't missed one. I want a good parliament, strong and powerful, that supports the supreme leader and the system, and serves the people.
سرباز بلند اسلام حاج قاسم سلیمانی صلوات ختم کنید. اللهم صل علی محمد و آل محمد وعجل فرجهم.
In this line, there are only men. Indeed, here in Iran, men and women vote separately, and they have their own entrance to this building. Now, last time in 2016, all of Tehran's 30 seats went to the Reformist Party. This time, with American maximum pressure campaign, the sanctions, the assassination of General Soleimani, well, indeed, the conservative camp is set to potentially win. Indeed, the reformists are all disappointed, demoralized, and they might just not come out and vote at all.
James Andre there reporting from Tehran. A deal between the United States and the Afghan Taliban is expected to be signed on February 29th. That, according to the United States' top diplomat. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says the agreement aims to build on a partial truce already in place to reduce violence across Afghanistan. For more than a year, the U.S. and the Taliban have been engaged in talks trying to reach a political settlement and reduce American troop presence in the region. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan stepping up a diplomatic push over the humanitarian crisis in Syria's Idlib province. Fighting continues there between Syrian government and Turkish-backed forces in the northwest. The UN is warning of a bloodbath and says more than 900,000 civilians have have been displaced there since the bombing offensive began in December. Emerald Maxwell with the story.
It's the biggest displacement of civilians of the nearly 9-year conflict. In Idlib city, families are now sleeping in mosques or living in the backs of their trucks, if they're lucky enough to have one.
We sleep in our car to secure it. There are no places to even put a tent. If you want to put up a tent at someone's place, they want rent on the land. If we had the money, we wouldn't be in this state.
We stay here from morning till evening. We sit here and eat and drink. Then we return to the mosque to sleep. This is our life now.
More than 400 civilians have been killed in air raids since mid-December. Many more have been fleeing the bombs, with whole towns deserted, as Russian-backed government troops push northwards with their offensive to rid the province of rebels and jihadists. With the violence escalating, civilians are being cornered ever closer to the Turkish border and are desperate to cross.
We've suffered a lot on the road. Turkey will either resolve our situation or make us return to our lands. It is a really difficult situation.
Ankara, though, says it can't take any more refugees, as it's overwhelmed with the 3.7 million Syrians already camped within its borders. The UN says that nearly 1 million more people have been displaced since the start of December.
Germany increasing police presence across the country to counter what the Interior Minister called a very high security threat from the far right. The decision follows the killing of 9 people in a racist shooting attack late Wednesday. Authorities say the gunman acted alone, but are investigating whether anyone knew of or supported the attacks. Laurent Bestachert with more on the probe.
A city in mourning. Hanau residents left flowers and candles to pay tribute to the victims of Wednesday's deadly shooting. Overcome with anger and grief, many were still trying to make sense of what happened. 18-year-old Peter Miniman was inside the bar where the attack took place. He managed to escape unharmed, but saw several of his friends get shot before his eyes.
My friend Idris, I don't know if he survived, but I think so. He had a hole in his throat. He was screaming, "I'm hit, I'm hit." And my other friend Momo was shot in the shoulder. Idris's brother died next to him. Ferhat died. These were my friends. I've known them for years.
The shooter, who was found dead in his apartment after the attack, purposely targeted people of immigrant descent. He also left behind a manifesto calling for the extermination of so-called inferior races. Germany's interior minister announced measures to increase police presence across the country, especially at sensitive sites such as mosques, as well as train stations and airports, while the country's justice minister vowed to do more to combat the rise of xenophobia and far-right extremism.
Right-wing extremism and right-wing terrorism are the greatest threats to our democracy at the moment.
Wednesday's attack came amid a surge in far-right violence in Germany. 2 weeks ago, German police arrested 12 people who were planning large-scale attacks on several mosques across the country.
Negotiations not going well at the EU budget summit in Brussels. Richer and poorer nations are deeply at odds over how big the budget should be and what it should prioritize. The so-called Frugal Four, that's Austria, Denmark, the Netherlands, and Sweden, say they won't put up more funds for the bloc's €1 trillion long-term spending package. The group insists the budget cannot top 1% of economic output. Expectations for a breakthrough are low Friday, and a new summit in March is seen as likely. For the latest on these testy negotiations, France 24's Europe editor Catherine Nicholson is here in the studio. Catherine, money always a contentious topic between EU countries, but what's the holdup here?
Well, the man in charge of the meeting, Charles Michel, has been holding one-on-one meetings with EU leaders that actually started last night at around 10 p.m. They went on late into the night and restarted this morning. And they are meant to be going back into a big group meeting around about now. You're right, this is very long for a summit. Usually we cover these things and we're pretty much wrapped up by day 2. The thing is, this was expected to be a difficult process. There wasn't necessarily an expectation that there would be a final deal that would come out of this summit. Some of the more optimistic people have been sort of predicting that sort of a landing zone, as they call it, might be identified, sort of a vague kind of area that might please everybody. But these issues really are proving very divisive, and this long, drawn-out summit is proving that. Let's not forget this is a very historic moment for the EU. The UK leaving the EU is unprecedented. It's leaving this big budget hole in the EU's finances. And of course, we also have the factor of national leaders always play to a domestic audience when they're negotiating with the EU. They like to go back home showing that they've defended their country's interests. And so this is a pretty good way of doing that. It does look, like you say, like we're heading for another summit. Currently, they're floating a date of early March.
So we hear this huge number, 1 trillion euros, but what does that really mean in practical terms? What is this budget going to cover, and how could it impact European lives?
Yeah, it's very abstract, isn't it? But there are two big chunks that are being argued over in terms of this budget negotiation. One of them is called cohesion policy, which sounds abstract as well. It's the sort of the regional funding policy, and it goes back to one of the key ideas of the European Union, bridging economic inequalities to kind of, bring up the countries that have sort of been left behind economically. Let's not forget that many of the countries in the east of the EU, they were behind the Iron Curtain just 30 years ago. Their economies have undergone drastic, changes. And that's a big battleground, this cohesion policy. There's one big group of mostly less well-off states that are defending this cohesion policy, and with it, defending the idea of a slightly bigger budget than there is currently. Then you've got another faction of 4 wealthier states, the Netherlands, Austria, Sweden and Denmark, and they're all saying, no, we don't want to pay more into the budget overall. The UK has left, we all knew this was coming, and we are going to have to cut back in certain areas. The trouble is, though, this cohesion funding, it's paid for very real, literally concrete things in these countries. We're talking new stretches of motorway, improvements to ports, public transport, and there are still big economic disparities between the EU member states. At the same time, it would mean big increases in budget payments for some of those countries. Germany, for example, which is more or less in the frugal kind of group, it is the biggest contributor currently to the EU budget at around 25 billion euros a year. That would go up to 32 billion a year under one of the proposals. So, that's not nothing. So the budget itself, it is going to be reduced in terms of the cohesion policy. It is going to be reduced in terms of agricultural spending as well. That's another big battleground. The Common Agricultural Policy is set to undergo a massive overhaul, with the EU looking to make its policies more green, more carbon reducing. Agriculture is a big contributor to carbon emissions. But of course, so many livelihoods are dependent on those subsidies. So it's no surprise that this is a very big, drawn out issue. And I think that next summit on March the 6th is looking very, very likely.
Europe editor Catherine Nicholson, translating the diplomatic speak into something we can actually understand.
We try.
Appreciate it. Stay with us here on France 24. More news coming up next.